Hey everyone, you're watching Inside the Americas. Coming up, campaigning is in full swing for the second round of Colombia's presidential election. On the way, a portrait of surprise contender Rodolfo Hernandez, the Donald Trump-like figure known as the king of TikTok. Then, as Uvalde buries the first of the 19 children killed in America's worst school shooting in a decade, we'll take a look at just what Joe Biden can really do about gun control. And dozens of young fans crowded the White House gate as South Korean boy band BTS came to town. The K-pop sensations were using their idol status to talk about a very serious subject, hate crimes. I'm Jeannie Godula. The first round of Colombia's presidential election saw a big win for leftist candidate Gustavo Petro. The senator is the former mayor of Bogota and was in the militant M19 group in his youth. If he wins, he'd be the first left-leaning president in Colombia's history. But the big surprise this week was the man Petro will be facing in the second round, Rodolfo Hernandez. The conservative businessman is known as the king of TikTok, and he could give Petro a real run for his money.
Just months ago, he was largely unknown across Colombia. But millionaire construction magnate Rodolfo Hernandez could now be in line to become the next president. The self-proclaimed king of TikTok focused on corruption in a savvy social media campaign that secured him an unlikely second spot in the first round of voting.
Colombia's problems, its terminal cancer, are the politicians who are robbing it of its wealth.
In his trademark outspoken style, the 77-year-old populist denounced elected officials as rats and corrupt thieves. In the 1970s, Hernandez made a fortune in real estate. In 2015, he was elected mayor of the city of Bucaramanga. During his term, he was suspended twice for abuse of office and for slapping a councillor who accused him of corruption. After waging a social media campaign against Colombia's political class, he is now seeking the backing of the traditional right-wing parties.
Anyone who wants to back me, I welcome them. Parties of all backgrounds, gender, color, I will accept all support. But I will not change my discourse.
And it's no surprise. After all, it's his anti-system, anti-migrant rhetoric that's driven his popularity, and his supporters are convinced of victory.
Here he was a very good mayor. Thanks to him, people were able to work, and street vendors stopped working illegally.
There are people who say he knows nothing about politics, but that's what councillors are for.
Rodolfo is trying to capitalize on some Colombians' fear of the left as he faces off against the ex-guerrilla Gustavo Petro, who's hoping to become the country's first ever leftist leader.
The Inside the Americas team was in Colombia to take a closer look at younger voters who could play a key role in this election. You can check out our special on the Peace Deal generation on the France 24 website, france24.com. Also this week, the town of Uvalde, Texas began to bury its dead. The first of 21 funerals from the worst school shooting in a decade were held for a pair of slain 10-year-old girls. They were among the 19 students and 2 teachers killed a week ago. When President Joe Biden went to console the grieving families in Texas, he was greeted with protesters shouting, "Do something." The question is, can he? To try and take a closer look, I'm joined on the set now by our international affairs commentator, Doug Herbert. Doug, these kind of school shootings keep happening over and over in the United States, much more than any other country around the world, and yet nothing ever changes.
Nothing changes. And by the way, Judy, 18 mass shootings. 18 have occurred since Uvalde. You haven't heard of any of them. We haven't spoken about any of them. That is how embedded and how numb and desensitized Americans are to gun culture. Gun culture, identifying with guns, fetishizing guns, it is almost codified in Americans' DNA. You have more guns, 400 million, than people. 330 million in the United States. Kids get guns as gifts when they're children in many cases. They grow up with guns around them. Guns are part of your identity, especially, studies show, if you're a Republican and you live in rural areas of the United States, you are twice as likely, more than twice as likely, to own a gun than if you're a Democrat living in big cities. So it's cultural, it's geographical, it's part of identity as well. You also have the fact that Second Amendment. A lot of courts, more and more conservative in the past 5 to 10 years, with judges very conservative, have what's called an expansive reading of the Second Amendment, giving the right to bear arms, which is why more and more decisions are leaning towards greater fewer restrictions on gun control and easier access to firearms.
Beyond the gun culture, there's also really an institutional issue that's key here.
And the institution is the U.S. Senate. In the U.S., you need this super majority. It's not enough just to have, say, Democrats who are overwhelmingly for gun control, more background checks, and so on and so forth, banning military-style assault weapons. Not just the judiciary, which is already in conservative hands, the Senate. It's right now 50-50, as you know, extremely tight, razor-thin majority for the Democrats. It takes the vice president to cast the tie-breaking vote. You need 60 votes, Jeannie, in the U.S. to pass legislation on any of the big issues of the day, any of the politicized issues, whether we're talking guns, whether we're talking tax hikes on the rich, whether we're talking climate legislation, whether we're talking greater abortion rights, so on and so forth. That blockage is not going to end anytime soon. The polarization is greater than ever. But let's be very clear here. It is Republican senators in Congress, not Democrats, Republicans, you have to name a name for what it is, that are blocking gun legislation from a national gun law from being able to go forward.
And in addition to all of this is all happening in the context of a U.S. Supreme Court that's set to rule on loosening gun regulation.
Absolutely. I mean, you say, what else can go wrong here? Well, we've all talked about the Supreme Court's preview of what we suspect will be overturning Roe versus Wade on the abortion front. Well, they're also right now hearing a challenge, and they're about to issue a ruling very, very soon, on a challenge to a century-old New York law that basically restricts the ability to carry a concealed weapon in public, requiring an individual to get a special license before they can do so. If the Supreme Court were to overturn that law, it could lead, the fear is it could lead to a weakening of gun laws in many other states, including one of the most pro-gun control states in the Union, which is Massachusetts. I will note that Massachusetts, has basically, because it has had some good gun restrictions on its books, the gun deaths, violence through gun and firearms, has gone down 40%. So that gives you a sense of what happens if you do put stricter gun legislation on the books. But the Supreme Court now is going against that tide, even though the public is in favor, overwhelmingly, of more gun control.
Doug Herbert, thank you so much for that. Well, while the U.S. is still struggling to find an answer to gun control, the Uvalde massacre pushed Canada to launch new anti-gun legislation. The proposed bill would freeze the sale of handguns and ban toys that look like guns. Prime Minister Justin Trudeau said the new measures were needed to combat a rise in gun violence in Canada, as Andy Hillier explains.
It's the Canadian government's most ambitious attempt yet to restrict access to firearms.
What this means is that it will no longer be possible to buy, sell, transfer, or import handguns anywhere in Canada. In other words, we're capping the market for handguns.
The legislation wouldn't ban ownership of handguns, but it would make it illegal to buy them. It would also ban some toys that look like guns. Prime Minister Justin Trudeau said it was important to pass the measures sooner rather than later.
We need less gun violence. We cannot let the guns debate become so polarized that nothing gets done. We cannot let that happen in our country.
A nod to Canada's southern neighbour, where just last week a gunman shot dead 19 children and 2 teachers at a school in the state of Texas. According to the Centers for Disease Control, more than 19,000 people were killed in gun homicides in the US in 2020, compared to just under 300 in Canada, which has much stronger gun legislation. That's partly down to a mass shooting 2 years ago in Nova Scotia that left 23 people dead. Forced to act, lawmakers banned the sale and use of more than 1,500 assault rifles. But Canadian authorities say the real problem may lie elsewhere. They say many of the guns used to commit crimes are illegally imported from the US.
Our picture of the week is this one. K-pop sensations BTS at the White House. The South Korean boy band wasn't in Washington just on a fan stop to say hello to Joe Biden. The group was there for talks on the growing wave of hate crimes targeting Asian Americans, a way to bring some much-needed attention to an otherwise sad and scary issue.
Pressed up against the White House gates, these young fans are at their nation's capital, hoping to catch a glimpse of their South Korean idols. Meanwhile, in an exceptionally crowded briefing room, the kings of K-pop, BTS, deliver a serious message.
We were devastated by the recent surge of hate crimes against Asian Americans. To put a stop to this and support this cause, we would like to take this opportunity to speak out once again on this issue.
We thank President Biden and the White House for giving this important opportunity to speak about the important causes, remind ourselves of what we can do as artists. Once again, thank you very much.
Then they're off to the Oval Office to meet the US President himself.
Welcome to the White House. Come on up here, guys.
The meeting comes following a sharp upswing in attacks against people of Asian descent since the pandemic, after Biden's predecessor Donald Trump encouraged Americans to blame China for COVID-19.
A lot of our Asian American friends have been subject to real discrimination. Hate only hides. When good people talk about it and say how bad it is, it goes down. So thank you.
Through BTS, President Biden knows he's reaching millions of their young fans. During the band's visit, the White House livestream garnered more than 10 times its usual traffic.
People care a lot about what you say.
Stars, but also influencers, the Korean pop sensations have become a force for social justice causes. And on Tuesday, a way for the White House to get its messaging across to America's youth.
That's all the time we have for this Inside the Americas. Thanks for watching. We'll see you again next week for all the news from north to south.
Beyond the News. A daily opportunity to go beyond the headlines and explore the news in depth. Revisited. A return to places which were in the news a long time ago. Reporters. Our in-depth reports on international news. The 51%. A program about women reshaping our world. The Observers. Meet our observers who alert us to hidden realities. Focus, exclusive reports by our correspondents and journalists. And Down to Earth, on the vast potential of our planet. Every day, watch Beyond the News on France 24 and France24.com.